So what's the Get Down?
Hip hop cultural lifestyle show.
So a lot of people feel that I have an intriguing background due to like my once criminal history, so what led to my incarceration in federal prison. And so what that was is back in 2010, you know, I like to speculate and think I was probably like the biggest cannabis dealer in America, right? And so at that time...
Explain the biggest though, because a lot of people think they have a lot of weed because they have a few turkey bags or they've seen 100 pounds or something like that.
Absolutely.
Explain.
So the reason why I'm gonna go ahead and put it out there that I think that, you know, that's probably a high probability is that when I was actually apprehended by the federal government, I was operating 3 private airplanes and I was doing what's called intertransnational organized crime. I was sentenced as the leader. I got the leadership role in my sentencing. And so what I did at that time is I operated 3 private airplanes and they were essentially circulating the United States. They were, 2 or 3 were coming out, 1 was coming in with money. And in the end, I was operating out of like 11 US states. So not sure if there's many people that are in the cannabis, gray or legal area that kind of sell in their hometowns. Mm-hmm. I don't know that there's that many that were shooting them all across America.
I got you, I got you. So let's do this though. Where'd you grow up?
I grew up in a city that we kind of call it the South Bay, even though the actual city itself is called Manhattan Beach, California. And so my family moved there before I was even 1 year old. And I went through kindergarten through high school, all through Manhattan Beach. And so today, that's where I currently reside as well.
So I'm an LA native, so I know what Manhattan Beach is and where it is and things of that nature.
Sure.
What made you go ahead and decide that you wanted to get into a criminal element?
It kind of started, I guess, like in high school, right? So in high school, there was a neighborhood kid that lived on my block. And he was a little bit older than me, but he was literally, 4 or 5 houses down. So through, back then, kids would play outside, ride the bikes and the skateboards. We became friends, and because he was older, he was already kind of introduced to weed at the time, right? And so as we would hang out, we started smoking together, and then in high school, my friends, we're all kind of like, it's a beach community where I live. And so back then, it's kind of even like, I don't know if you want to say 70s, a lot of the young people were smoking even back then. And so to kind of help, pay for like me to purchase a little bit of personal smoke, I would sometimes sell some to my classmates and stuff like that. I don't know if that kind of answers the question of Manhattan Beach.
You good.
Yeah.
Because the thing all right, let me say it like this, because like I said, I'm an LA native, okay? Manhattan Beach is very, very, very affluent.
For sure.
So what made you just think that like, you know what, man, I'm gonna just go ahead and sell some weed? Yeah.
Another part of my background was, as a kid when I was young, my parents were divorced, and my dad, I would go to his house on the weekends, and my dad would smoke. Now, granted, he wasn't trying to like have it around me, but the smoke lingers, and
that's where you were introduced.
Yeah, that distinct smell.
Right.
And I can recall going to my dad's on the weekend one time, and there was brownies in the refrigerator, and I was like, as a kid, oh yeah, brownies, right?
Bud brownies.
So yeah, my dad said, no, those are adult brownies, right? So I guess through like the introduction of my friend who lived on my block,
right,
and then the smelling it, and it just kind of was around, right? And so at the time, I didn't really think that it was like something really bad, I guess, and it just kind of escalated. And then when I started to grow is, so my dad always was an entrepreneur and owned dry cleaning businesses.
All right.
Kind of, like the Jeffersons, right? So my dad owned a lot of dry cleaners in California, and at one point probably like over 10. And so I kind of grew up as, wanting to think I was going to take over his business and an entrepreneur. And so
were you interested in the dry cleaning business?
A little bit, yeah, just because it was the family business, and I did work there. So at one point I was not good in high school, and I ditched a lot because I was hanging out with older kids, and I was a DJ. I would DJ on a Wednesday night and then not go to school on Thursday. And so
were you getting money at this time with the weed?
Yeah, like DJing. Obviously, DJing.
Oh, okay,
not
just
what,
DJing.
Yeah,
right.
and
so
then
you weren't selling weed or anything at this time?
At a small scale, just to my
right.
friends,
All right.
like just small amount, little personal. But I eventually opened up an automotive business, not in the sense of like a mechanic, but I did like auto alarms and car stereo and window tinting. And so once I opened that business, and I was literally like probably 20 years old when I started that. And so as I had that automotive shop, it was in the city of Lawndale.
All right.
And so Lawndale, it has its share of people out there hustling and balling and stuff. So through that shop, dope dealers would come by. And they would come by and spend a lot of money. Back then, like car stereos were very like popular. I mean, people had the subwoofers and the amps, and now you just buy a car and it already has that in there, right? But back then, so I was starting to meet a lot of these types of people, and then they would come in, and I started saying, oh, he's got a Porsche, he's got this, and so I started to network with some of those people, and that also kind of led to the escalation of me trying to grow as a a cannabis dealer.
So as what did you decide was your next step? I see you went through your power moment. So what was your next step of like, all right, this is how I get to the next level, or what made you even more hungry to get to the next level?
So I identify a lot with people that I shouldn't say identify. I observe and I evaluate like how did they make money. So I look at people that are oftentimes successful and how they made their money, and so one of the close friends that I was around back then when I had my auto shop, he was a cannabis grower, and he had multiple grows going, and he was always just cashed up. He always had the bankroll, and I knew he was.
Was he a farmer or just a house grower?
No, he had commercial grows,
All right.
very, very on large scale for back then too,
Right.
And so he started just like fronting to me, back then it was like, oh, here's a 20 pack, and then it became, oh, here's an 80 pack.
How old are you at this around this time?
Probably 22, something like that. Yeah. And so once I kind of had that credit line and saw how this guy was doing it, and then the product that he was giving to me on the front was just incredible. I mean, it was what we call AAA,
right.
Indoor, and it really sold itself. And by then it kind of like starts to grow by itself. And through my background of, having the auto shop and kind of like always living in the same area,
right.
I knew a lot of people. So then it just started to kind of grow, and I started, just serving, my local friends, cannabis that I grew up with in Little League and high school, and then now through owning the auto shop. And so that's kind of how it started growing. And then through my auto shop, I also got involved in other, what I always call like black market types of businesses, right? So I started working with a car theft ring that exclusively did Porsche, right? And so through my auto shop, I started purchasing parts from them and became like really tight niched into their circle.
Right.
I started buying, let me get some rims for my Porsche, let me get the motor. So now all of a sudden my shop, you look outside of my parking lot, I got like 20 Porsches out there, and all these dope dealers are coming, oh, I want a wide body, I want a convertible top. And so I would do those sort of things, and I ran in these.
Were you selling cars also, or were you just?
A little bit. I might do something like that, kind of like the dudes you see on TV that have those reality shows like flipping cars and stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Were you making secret compartments?
At that time, no, because we weren't really doing out of town stuff, what we call out of town.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So now you got the shop going. You making money. So where, how is this going? Like, what's the next step? What made you decide, like, hey, I need to go to this state, that state, and all of that? And how was your operations? Explain that part.
Okay, so through like my friend that was like a commercial grower, he eventually got connected to what we call a plug, right? And he was plugged in with some Canadians. And at the time, the Canadians were going, you know, like what I refer to as pretty like hard and heavy on their weight. And they were all doing indoor grows in Vancouver, Canada, right? And so my friend eventually didn't really even need to have his grows anymore because the Canadians were sending him so much on a front. And back then we used to get these different grades. We would call them B, A, and AAA. So obviously a B is a lower price, an A is a mid, and a AAA is like, you know, top tier. And so he started having, you know, all of these variations, and then it became, you know, like he started giving me more and more. And then I kind of outgrew what he was providing, you know, for me at that time. And, you know, through me kind of like asking around and seeing things, I knew like the Canadians, you know, were like the big source. Kind of how like somebody like a Frank Lucas went to Vietnam and did what he did, right? So.
Did you see yourself like that?
In a way, I'll get to that. I did do some stuff that is very similar to, you know, how he inventively came up with a product, you know, through another country in that, you know, in the drug trade. So when my friend started doing Canadians, a buddy of mine approached me, and he was kind of a new guy, and he started saying, hey, you know, I work with a Canadian too. You know, and he was kind of like not wanting to be in the business. And he was like, you know, hey, can I have you meet my Canadian? Can I give you guys? And he kind of wanted to have us connect and then him just get a commission check later on. Like every $100, every pound I do, I'll cut him a check for $75 or something like that, you know? So
was that more of just a commission, or that's just a middleman fee? What?
Well, in the business of the cannabis industry at that time, people would oftentimes, who don't want to be a dope dealer, I would negotiate things of that nature with them. So I would say, oh, this isn't what you do, but you know a person that does. So we have a sit down, you introduce the both of us, and then you disappear and we mutually work together. And let's say, you know, at the end of the month, the guy ran through 100, and I say, oh, well, I have $75 times 100. I'll call them up and say I have a commission check, which it's lucrative for them, you know, and granted through the laws of conspiracy, you know, they could get convicted, but in a way they're kind of like, you know, wiping their hands of it, and they're still able to get, you know, supplemental income into their average job.
And make sure that the people understand, if they don't think that it's lucrative, you're giving them how much money off of?
It depends. Sometimes $50. Sometimes back then.
That's per pound, though.
Per pound, yes.
There you go. That's what people don't understand.
So if their customer ends up like, you know, being really consistent and what we call like flowing, you know, heavy, then, you know, they can get a good check. You know, they could potentially make more than whatever their general income source of income would be. So real quick, if I could go back to how the Canadians eventually came to me through like a friend, and we connected, and I knew another friend of mine that was a customer, and he was really cash fluid, right? And so the Canadian didn't want to front to me initially because we didn't have a relationship like that.
Right.
So we started saying, well, what if we prepay? And then I had heard through my friend who was getting the Canadian, you know, bud and was shooting it to me, he was getting a better price because he had money to prepay before it jumped the border into America. So we approached this guy on the same level, and this is a totally different source out of Canada. We said, how much if we prepay? We'll send you the money, you shop, buy whatever is around, and then you send it to us in Los Angeles. So the Canadian was like, sure, I'm down. So my friend, who was really cash heavy at that moment, him and I took a trip, our first trip, for that matter, my first trip, to Canada to see where this guy lived. That was our whole objective. And he knew that, the Canadian. We said, we have to see where you live to make sure that we're obviously sending you a couple $100 grand, you know. I think our deal was we were going to send him 300 grand. You know, maybe 600, depending on, you know, like what we were going to do. I think the first one was 300, and we were going to prepay. And at that time, so we went there and we were like, hey, we need to see an electric bill, a phone bill. We, you know, and so we stayed at his house. We checked everything out. And then at that point, I kind of superseded my plug, right? And I got an additional plug in Canada. Once I got that additional plug, they provided me with, we had an encrypted BlackBerry. Back then, Blackberries were popular, and it was called PGP encryption. And it was our own service, like as a server based out of like Costa Rica, where you can't get a search warrant to hack into, the server. So this particular encrypted BlackBerry, everything was instant messaging, and we could message back and forth through other countries. It had, when you purchased it, it was just under $2,000. And inside the box, it had like the microchip from the actual speaker that we know as speakerphone.
Right.
That was in there. And then they would disable the camera, and they would disable the GPS. And so literally when I say a phone, it's not like you cannot have a audio conversation. It's strictly email to email, but it's instant, like bing, 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 and it's email to email. So that's kind of started off my thing. And once I started with that particular Canadian, then I started realizing, it comes into the Seattle, Washington border. I started working with people up in Seattle, Washington. I came across a crew, and they were with one of the biggest organizations in British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada, which was a biker club, right? And so that particular person out of Seattle put me in with their clique, and now I have my original Canadian friend from the neighborhood. I have an actual Canadian, and then I have a crew in Seattle. So all three of these people are providing me with large amounts of, weight. And then I had local people in, Los Angeles that couldn't maybe have hundreds, but they knew that my name was good, and I pay for when people shoot me, large amounts. I'm not going to run off with their product. So they knew, and I can off everything they had. So my friend out of Seattle, we started, sending it out of town, and we lost 100 pounds. And because it was on his name through, the bikers basically halted, him on what he was getting, per week. And then he approached them and was like, hey, I understand I owe you guys $1 million. As he owed him $1 million or whatever. I think we lost 300. We lost 300. So he owed him $1 million, and he said, hey, I'll give you guys my best guy, and he can work off my debt. And I'll try to give you, houses, cars, whatever I can. So they eventually said, well, who's this guy? And so I rolled up from Los Angeles to the Seattle border. I eventually jumped into Canada, and as I was in Canada, the very first Canadian I met, he knew those guys. And he was trying to they're kind of in the general area of Canada and that community. A lot of the same people. However, these were, club members. And my first Canadian was not a club member. So I went up there, and I was staying at my first Canadian's house, and he knew those guys, and he was trying to work it to where I can have an introduction, as well as through my friend who lost the load, right? And so we were trying to figure out, because that was a major plug. I mean, those guys were the biggest. I mean, it doesn't get much bigger. When I say it's a club, if you could use an analogy, kind of like a basketball team or a football team, where it's not one person who's a grower, but there's 25 people, and they're all bringing it to the club, and they're all shooting it across the border. So
what motorcycle club was it?
Oh yeah, that I don't really want to say on camera, but most people can identify it's probably the biggest one in the world, right?
Gotcha.
So
are you a part of the club?
No, I'm not an actual member,
member,
but I'm very tied in.
Gotcha.
For instance, the one of the key members I worked with would be the Sergeant of Arms.
Right.
So eventually, funny story. So I was in Canada, and I was trying to eventually meet these people directly, and my friend whose house I was staying at, he was like, oh, hey, me and my wife are going to go to a birthday party and some sort of maybe another wedding reception or something for the day. But he was like, hey, here's my car keys. The GPS will get you around. Just type in wherever you want to go, do your thing. And so I hung out at the house for a while, and I was like, man, and so the bikers I knew, I knew of their club, and I knew of a bar that they associated with at this particular bar. So I was like, I typed in the name to my friend's GPS in the car and got the address to the bar. I shot over there, so when my Canadian friend came home, he calls me, "Where are you?" And I was like, "Oh, I'm at such and such club." And he's like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "You know what I'm doing? Like, I'm trying to meet the dude, you know what I mean?" And so he's like, "Oh, I'm on my way over." And so eventually it was beneficial for him to get to those guys and do an introduction before my friend in Seattle. So my friend, through owing them $1 million, it was a little bit of a tainted relationship at that particular moment. So my other friend, he didn't have any type of debt, and he was about to, kind of say like, "Hey, there's this dude." So long story short, my friend eventually, the Canadian, connected us. We had to sit down. In order to build a relationship with that particular crew, I also did prepay, and I sent up a couple $100,000 before they started sending me, major loads of cannabis. Yeah.
So from there, once you had the pipeline that you were really looking for, you became the plug. Then what's next?
So the thing that really took what I did to the next level is there was a moment, prior to when I got very large into what I was doing. When I say large, it means like a grand scale, or when I was really making
How many pounds?
As far as like what I would do every week, maybe like 500 every couple of days, something like that. And so I lost my train of thought. So I guess, what kicked it into high gear as far as my profitability and my actual what I was making, income-wise. So there was a time in Los Angeles when I was hands-on. And if let's say I have a customer, I'm personally going to drive to their house and show up and say, "Here's your 20-pack. Oh, now you owe me, 60 grand." Right? And so when I was more hands-on, there was a time I used to drive around to LA, and the people that I associated with, some of them knew like actors and celebrities, and they would mention like, A-list actors, and like, "Oh, I hang out with this guy and that." And so one day I was dropping off some Canadian bud to one of my clients in Hollywood, California. And, I had the top of the line. It's all indoor. There's no, outdoor. There's no like bad quality. Even if it was what's like an A or a B grade, it's still like high-end commercial, indoor hydroponic. So he comes to me when I'm dropping off at his house, and he's like, "Hey, you just got Canadian, check this stuff out." And he's like, "This is Kush." And so I've dealt with all sorts of different strains. When I would get a load of cannabis, it might have like 30 strains. There was white rhino, there was juicy fruit, sugar bear, hemp, hash, all kinds of different various things, hash plant. So when he said the Kush, it didn't really, I was just like, "Oh, okay, yours better than mine, whatever." Right. So I hung out, and people were coming. It's like, kind of like a trap. People were coming over, and they were buying bud, this particular Kush strain, for like outrageous amounts of money. Like, so for instance, I might sell him a pound at that moment for $4,000, right? Next thing I know, he's selling them for like $7,000. Or he's having people come in and buy like an ounce off him for like $700. And back then, an ounce of, the Canadian was maybe like $400, $350, whatever. So I was kind of bugged out by that. And I was like, here's the wheels again. Like, what's up with this, right? So at that moment in California, Los Angeles, nobody could come to you and say, "Oh, I have 500 pounds of Kush." It's impossible. So somebody might have 4, 3, 1, whatever, right? So as I learned about the Kush and I started seeing the price, price point, I was like, I gotta get this. And at that point, I knew local growers in Los Angeles. I eventually found some guys that had Kush, and I kept hounding them, "Let me get some Kush clones." And for those that don't know, they're baby plants. That's what you use to start a grow. And I kept pushing, "Let me get some clones." Nobody would sell them to me. They're like, "Exclusive, oh, we don't want to give it away." Eventually, I offered like ridiculous money. They can't refuse it. So I purchased like 50 clones. And through my Canadians, I said, hey, I want to send these to you guys, and I'll even pay you more to start growing this particular strain exclusively for me. And so they said, that's fine, you don't have to pay us more, but as long as you're moving more product, we're cool with it. And they had different prices. Obviously, a B is less expensive than a AAA. And so in my head, I was like, oh, this is cool. So I sent, the baby cannabis plants up to the club members up there, and they just started like spreading them, And after a while, I told my friend, like, hey, what I gave you guys hadn't shown up for a long time, like 8 months. And it takes a while to take like 50 plants and expand them into where you're growing hundreds of them, right? And at the time, I was just, like my patience.
You did it all yourself? You cloned yourself?
No, I just purchased rooted clones, and then I sent the rooted clones. So that's why part of my indictment was intertransnational organized crime, because it was different countries, right? And then also throughout America over state lines.
Right.
So when I sent those to them, it was a game changer. So now, eventually when I started getting them, I was like telling them, hey dude, are you guys giving them to someone else? How come I haven't seen them yet? They would write on a Sharpie what the brand of Kush or the brand of cannabis was every time. And at one point it said Yankee Kush. And I was like, okay, what's this? And it wasn't what I gave them. And I was like, dude, come on, man. Are you guys like playing me? Long story short, eventually like 75 like real Kush came through. And I shot them out to the streets of LA, and they just were gone in seconds, right? They were gone. And so what happened at that point, I went from being able to make, hundreds of dollars profit on 1 pound to like over $1,000 profit on 1 pound. So I might at that time been able to get, let's say, $3,200 for a pound of Kush, and then I could take it and go and sell it for like $5,000, stuff like that. And so I was doing like massive amounts. Eventually they started coming in, 100, 200, 300 pounds, and then you start to see the escalation of my profit. It's going from $1,000 per pound, and now I'm moving 300 in a week, whatever. So that's kind of like how I invented and created like my own market, and was able to like escalate my price point, profitability per pound. The government, caught up to me, and I was arrested. I had like a fairly large organization, so much so, the government said, hey, this is, I guess the name of the investigation was Jason's Syndicate. And there's a word for it when they do like a raid in one day, and it's a multi-state raid. So when the raids took place for my organization, it was a multi-state raid simultaneously through the same time in all time zones. So for instance, they raided Seattle, they raided California, Atlanta, Chicago, Detroit, and it was like a major takedown. So at that point, you can imagine when they've done, there was other like, organized crime, like there's other biker gangs here within, the United States, where they do simultaneous raids, similar to maybe even like a BMF. I don't know if they had like a simultaneous raids throughout the United States. So definitely had a large crew. And when I was at that moment, when I did get arrested, I was completely hands off. And all I did was delegate through my phone and make connections like, hey, you're going to meet the pilot. We'll be in Atlanta at 3 o'clock. When he touches down, you guys call him and meet up. And then I'll touch base. Hey, you got your work? How's it look? There should be this many of that one. There should be this kind. So it got to be where I was basically, more of just, complete manipulating, this whole network. Yeah.
So you got your network together. How much you pulling in a week?
Definitely a couple $100,000 every few days. So again, at this time, I was making like over $1,000 on 1 pound, and I was like all over America, right? So at just to kind of so that the people can identify. So some of the areas that I was dropping in was it started in Seattle, and then it would work its way down. So some of it would stay in Seattle, and then it would work its way to Los Angeles. And through Los Angeles, it started, a distribution. And then it went from all the areas like St. Louis, Chicago, Ohio, Chicago, Detroit, Atlanta, New Jersey, New York, Boston, Maine. It was North Carolina, Alabama. Like, I was shooting this stuff everywhere, And so it actually became bigger than myself. It was something that, even at time before I got clipped by the government, I could sense it, and I knew things had happened where I was hot. So I was trying to go kind of underground, and I was going to give most of my business over to someone to run it for me. And I was going to do like what we spoke about earlier, just take a commission check off the mass profit. And at that point, it was really hard to find someone that I could have do that. I had a few people, but there's so much involved in the orchestration of that type of network.
You consistently refer to you and your group as an organization. Do you see yourself and your group as a real, not narcotic, but cannabis organization?
Yeah, I definitely would say that because, I would say the same thing with any business, like a Starbucks or something like that, and has, multiple locations all across America. All the employees are, part of their staff. So, and I think of, some of these people, they're friends, and then some of them are straight up just business, and I've never met them before until we do business, and it's nothing but business. So I definitely feel like there's, hierarchies within, what we were doing. Like if you had a flow chart, there would be, maybe the club members would be at the top of the flow chart, and then I would probably be the next one, and then all of these people in these various states would, cover the downline of like a pyramid, right? So I do feel it is like a syndicate or an organized type of crew,
Okay. So you're up there, everything's going fine, you're making your money, you're living your life. Did you have a family at the time, or were you just still single?
I did. So I didn't have, kids, but I do have, I was married when I was arrested.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
All right.
I kind of knew not to really get it, have children.
Right.
Because of the state of what I was doing, I didn't want to have, inevitably what happened when I was indicted was like a precursor to me not having kids, because I thought maybe someday when perhaps I could retire from the game, then that's the time to bring kids into my family.
Wow. So what happened? How'd you how'd you get cracked? What was the weak link in this machine, this organization?
Sure. So initially what happened is a buddy of mine came to me, and he kind of, this is right when the medical dispensaries were popping up in Los Angeles.
What year is this?
That's probably, I want to say 2005, 2006 maybe. So those tanked out and crashed the market value of Kush. So at that time I might wholesale it for $5,000, right? And then they're going to turn around and sit $5,500 for it. Then it totally tanked it out. And here I was used to making that large profit. A buddy of mine hit me up, and he's like, hey, I did some time. He was a felon. He did some times with a crew out of Detroit, and they were serving like Mexican stress bud out of trap houses in the city of Detroit. And so he hit me up, and he was like, I think it could be good, And so at the time, I've never gone out of state, and we're all kind of like laying the blueprint. And so he's like, I got a dude that'll drive it there in a pickup truck. And so the very first time I sent something out of state was to Detroit. In actuality, I didn't have a whole lot of cash flow to cover like what I had if potentially it got busted along the way.
Yeah.
So it was a lot of money in the end, you know. I was making.
How much did you ship?
I shipped 80 pounds at that time. And even though it wasn't like a lot, I was always buying houses and cars, and then I used my own cash flow to float all of my, what I would front people to continue to re-up. So
right.
I didn't, you know, if I lost, you know, that's just, you don't want to lose that kind of money, right? So anyways, I just kind of crossed my fingers and said, let's do it. And he loaded up just a regular pickup truck, and it was dead winter, so there was snow. And it was like he took a few days to actually drive from Los Angeles to Detroit. And when it got there, even those guys didn't really know how to deal with Kush yet. It was brand new for them. And they were having difficulty. So I was, at the time they owed me, it was somewhere around 900 grand, $1 million or something like that. And my friend who lined them up, it was his customer, he just connected me so I could call and say, how much money do you guys have? How many have you gotten rid of? When can we square up? When will you want more? So I could, you know, contact and figure these things out. I start to kind of like panic in the sense that they didn't move anything, right? I'm like, you know, it's like a week, 2 weeks in. I'm like, how many did you guys get rid of? Oh, like something crazy, like single digits. And I'm like, oh no, like all the bud is far away. I'm not bringing that all the way back to California. They eventually came to Las Vegas. I had to sit down and I explained to them, like, this is like Gucci. You know, this is what is starting to pop up in the hip hop songs. So they went back, they blew it out like in a week and said, we're ready to re-up. So instead of using an actual like pickup truck, single guy doing his thing, while this was happening, I came across a dude out of Oregon, and he operated a freight company through big rigs. And so he wasn't like a trucker, but he subcontracted to all kinds of truckers for freight, right? And so I took a trip to Oregon. I had to sit down with this guy who owned a freight company. We also had another person there that would do like wooden crates. Through like construction, he would build out wooden crates. So we came up with the plan, let's build wooden crates. Let's use your freight, you know, operation. Let's put this bud into, you know, big rigs, and let's start sending it, you know, to Detroit. So that was the initial key of my transportation, or the initial startup was how I was getting it, you know, out of town.
Did you make any of the further decisions as far as like how the transportation or any of that was going to be taken care of?
Yeah, no, I orchestrated all that. I like to think, like, when I say, like, I sometimes say puppet master, you know? So in a roundabout way, I've located these freight people through my network of people that I dealt with. And so we started sending in, you know, shipping trucks, big rigs. And they were going to Detroit at first, and then the next destination was, because it's a quick jump, was Chicago. And then from Chicago, I opened up Atlanta. So there was a little while of a run, I'll call it, where I was providing cannabis through big rigs going into Detroit, Chicago, and Atlanta, right? And so what I had done was I didn't want to have the person meet a big rig driver and somehow like communicate with a big rig driver, like, oh, do you know where I can get this? And then possibly like supersede or do something, or even a customer in Detroit, like, I don't want them to know how I get it to them, right? If they get busted, they could say, oh, I get it from this guy, he brings it here in a big rig. So what I used is what I called was a catcher. I referred to him as the catcher, and I paid this person a flat rate of $20,000 a month. And now he lived in Las Vegas, and so the catcher would go to Detroit and he would meet the big rig, right? And then he would deliver it to the customer. So that way there's really like no interaction of, you know, they don't know I'm using a big rig. They're not, you know, hanging out, having conversations with these guys. So this guy's job was 20 grand a month. He was supposed to be in Chicago to drop a load. He would be in Atlanta to drop a load, pick up money. You know, sometimes it was like, hey, you know, they're not ready to re-up, but they have a couple $100 grand. And oftentimes I would have my crew go and pick up that money because, you know, let's say somebody owes me 300 grand on a Tuesday.
All right.
And then they get busted on a Wednesday.
Money
you know,
gone.
so I would oftentimes when I knew the money was there, I would arrange for pickup. So the dude who I was paying the flat rate, the catcher of 20 grand, he had a drug problem, and I think he was into like speed, you know. So he messed up, and he was supposed to be on Vegas on a plane to Detroit to meet a big rig, you know, to catch the load when it came in.
Right.
He missed it. He missed it by one day. So that particular big rig, the freight company, and I didn't know how he was doing it. I should have, but I didn't know. And I didn't realize he was like subcontracting a person who may not even, or actually did not know they have cannabis on their big rig.
Oh, wow.
Instead of like including them in on the profit, like, yo, you're taking weed to Detroit, we're gonna pay you. He's just like boxing it up like it's, you know, like whatever common goods that are legal. And so the catcher out of Vegas missed it. And when the load got to Detroit, the freight company said, oh, I know like a loading dock or another freight company where we could drop the load and you can leave it there overnight. But it had absolutely nothing to do with my crew and my organization. So the catcher, what he would commonly do is he would rent like, you know, a cargo van. And so back then we had our, I don't even know the name of the little suction cup to the window, the GPS, you know?
Oh.
Okay? So he picks up at the freight company in Detroit a crate. A crate he loads into a cargo van. Now when he takes off from that freight place, he's rolled up on by like actual just regular undercover local Detroit police. And they tell him, listen, we have the GPS. We know you're going to this house. You can do yourself a favor and you can drop that load to them and we'll let you go, right? And so this dude, I couldn't believe, like, why, right? Like, why not just, you know what you're doing when you get into this, right? So that guy decided to cooperate, right? So he
snitched on you?
Not on me at that particular moment. This is what he did. He jumped in the van, and you know, he did, obviously while he was under the lights, he obviously explained everything. And so at that moment, they loaded up the van, took it over to my customers, and he acted like, oh, I'm here to drop it all off. And then he gets rolled up on, and they actually pretend to, like, you know, handcuff him and take him in. And so they don't know that, you know, that dude just set them up.
Right.
So when all this was happening, I would always know when the loads were being dropped because of things like this. So even if the time zone was different, the catcher would call me. I'd be in my house in, you know, Manhattan Beach, and I might be on the phone already at 5 in the morning because they're already doing work at like 8 in the morning or whatever in Detroit. And so you know, I'm making sure everyone's getting everything. There's nobody got busted. So I find out through a lawyer, the catcher, he contacted a lawyer that he knew in Vegas. Well, the people that I knew in Vegas where he lived, they hit me up and they were like, yo, dude, he's in custody and he's cooperating and he drove the load. Like the lawyer that, you know, knew, he automatically told members of my clique in Vegas that, oh, fucking your catcher just did this. And so eventually the people in Detroit gave the dude that cooperated, they gave him back all of his cell phones, and he was released in a few hours the same day, right? Now that dude flies back to Las Vegas, and at that time, as I told you guys, I was paying him 20 grand flat rate a month to work for me, right? And so I owed him 10,000 from the month before because it's just whatever I was waiting to pay him. So then he wanted his like 30 grand. So he started contacting the people, you know, out in Vegas,
right,
saying, "Oh, I didn't snitch on me, and I want that money, and I'll kind of like keep you guys out of it." You know, it was kind of like, you know, he wanted his money, and it was kind of like a form of blackmail to not like go all the way and tell on, you know, who the leaders are.
Right.
So, dude, I didn't know like what to do, you know? And so at that point, I was like, you know, like, what do I do? And I tried to talk to my crew out in Vegas that knew this dude. And this particular guy got, you know, brought to me as like, oh, he could do this for you. I didn't know him. I didn't vet him through my childhood, right? So people that I knew more than him were like, I don't know, you know, like maybe we can, you know, get the money to a lawyer and we could just make sure that, you know, we're out of it type of thing. And so I was like, man, I don't know how to approach this. Obviously, I don't condone what he did, and I don't feel like I should pay him for what he did. But at the same time, it's like, if I'm really wealthy, do I like try to keep myself out of this, or what do I do? So I agreed to meet somebody that he knew, like separately, to like literally just pay for what I thought was an attorney, right? But come to find out, this dude, when they let him go, he had 0 charges. He's not charged. He's not coming back to court on a court date.
So you never saw his paperwork or anything?
No, there was fucking no paperwork because they were just said, go. Nah. We'll call you. So basically at that point, he works for them and they control him. So when I was asking for paperwork, there was none to be had. And so I kind of arranged, I went out to Vegas to like pay on the strength of a retainer, hoping that, you know, keep me out of it, and let's hope that that was like, you know, that's where it ends, right?
Right.
And so I decided to take like a hiatus on even some like local members that I was shooting to, right?
Right.
Let's chill for a minute and see where this is, and then definitely the big rig crew. So we waited for a while, and then I kind of just was like, you know, let's go again. You know, the guys kept pushing me. Where this is like also for your audience out there, this is an addiction for me at this point.
Hustling?
Yeah. So I couldn't be without doing what I'm doing, and I'm involved with a motorcycle club, and they said, well, let's cool down. Oh, let's heat up. You know what I mean? So it's like sometimes it's like you gotta, you know, what I call grow some balls, you know? And so we chilled for a minute, and then we said, let's go. So I fired up the big rig company again up in Oregon, and I had a load that we were going to go to Atlanta. And so now I was like, you know, I can use the load locally. Actually, at the time, because we took such a hiatus, a lot of my local people in Los Angeles, it was dry, right? And so I said, let's divert what I have at the big rig to Los Angeles. And so I normally would have like, sometimes when those would come down, I had a big rig loading dock in the city of Compton.
So you had hundreds of pounds in trucks in Compton?
Yeah. Sometimes that's where it would arrive. Yeah.
I know where those docks are. They're over there off of Wilmington.
Right, yeah.
That's around the corner from 40.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah, so I decided to like divert what was headed to Atlanta back to, you know, and one of my buddies out of the Porsche business, he kept wanting to get into the cannabis game with me. He saw I was making money. He's like, yo, when are you going to let me in? And I was like, you got some customers. And so he never really had customers. So I was like, I hit him up one day and I was like, hey, you know, can we drop a load? I'll shoot you money to catch it, you know? And he was like, yeah. So literally these crates, you can't take them off by hand. And the reason we designed a crate like that is because if something's in a big rig and it's just, like a couple 100 pounds in duffel bags, which is, it's not that big at the end of the day, right? So we designed crates to make them look like they're large freight. So when it comes off the big rig, it needs to be on a forklift, in some cases, right? And so this particular load was big, and my buddy, the Porsche guy, he got the load, everything was fine. He calls me, he's like, hey, come by and scoop it up. And at this time, I didn't really, have other people to where I was just gonna go scoop it up myself. And I remember going to his place, and because I already knew that I was hot prior a few months ago when I was active with the big rig, I drive around the block, and this is a note for all you guys out there. You should never just drive directly into where you're going to do business. You should also take the time and drive around a little bit and then eventually go to where you're going. And I started picking them off. They were everywhere, dude. I kid you not. They were in all the cars that I taught myself to see that they were in. The Explorers with the sunscreen actually on the window, ducked down. And I was like, dude, there's a car there. There's a car there, and there's a car there, and sometimes in today's world, people sit on the phone in the car, and you're like, "What's this dude doing? Why is he here in the car?" But this was pretty obvious, at that time, like, why are these people in these cars? So I backed out of it, and I called my friend, and I said, "Bro, I'm pretty sure they're everywhere around your place." And he's like, "What do you mean?" And he had Porsches. Because he had so many cars, they were like on the block down the street, on the block. He was parking them further away. And I was like, dude, go pick up the one that you have on the corner, and there's going to be a dude right there, and you'll see. And so I remember, after I bailed from his place, I jammed back to my own personal residence, and I started calling people that lived close by me. And I said, dude, get to my house now, emergency, emergency. And I even had a dude that, he owned a dump truck. And so how I would get the money back from the big rigs really quick is I used what's called these tool containers for job sites, and you can bolt them into the ground. So they're almost like 5 foot long, and like really deep toolboxes, and they're metal, and you can put padlocks on them. I must have had like half a dozen or more all cut open with the locks. And
in one truck?
No, at my house.
Oh, I got you.
So when I would bring money home, they would be in these containers, and I would use a Sawzall and open them up and break into them. And then I had, numerous prepaid phones and money counters and money at my own personal residence. So all of like 2 or 3 of my friends did an influx. We're loading these containers and stuff into the dump truck. At the time, I was successful enough. I had a personal assistant, and I told her, start shredding all of my stuff for my trips. Start shredding everything from Detroit and Chicago. She's in my personal home office shredding. I'm getting rid of like phones, the money counter, and we're just going. And I called my dad, which he knew what I was doing. And I said, hey, dude, can you go to such and such Porsche shop? Tell me what's going on over there. So my dad hits me up later on. He's like, dude, the whole place is fucking raided. He's like, all the cars that have the lights in the grills, they're all over the driveway, and it's done. And I was like, oh man. So my buddy who fell that day is so solid and cool. He didn't cooperate. I got him, and I got him bailed out of there probably like in at least one day, like quick. I put up, I think, 50 grand in cash. I already knew of bail bonds. We got him out, boom, quick. And so that kind of ended there. But these people they're adding up. Now they got a load in Detroit. Now they followed it all the way from Oregon. So they followed it from Oregon, and then they captured it when this was like, we did like almost like a San Pedro area out here. So then I'm like, man, so now I take like another break, and we're kind of just chilling. And then eventually, like, it seems good again, and it's my addiction, and it's the way I make money. So we fire it back up. And at this point, a dude approaches me and says, hey, I know this older guy, and he has an airplane, and he's down. And I was like, oh, really? Let's hook it up, right? And so my friend links up me and this older guy who's probably in his 60s, and he's like an ex-Green Beret. He's a pilot. He already owned his own plane. He's like, yeah, I'll go anywhere. I'll meet anyone. I'll do whatever you need me to do. So I'm like, oh man, this is cool. So now I fire up the airplane, and the airplane, you know, people think like right away how we take an airplane, you can be in Chicago the same day.
Right.
You can't in the plane that we use a Cessna, right? And you can't even get above the clouds, and you have to gas up numbers of times throughout your day, right? So it would take a few days to get to Chicago or Atlanta. So eventually the pilot comes to me and says like, hey, you know, I need to get above the clouds. I need to go faster. I need to have less gas up trips. And I was like, well, what do you need? You know, he's like, probably, you know, 200 grand, and I could get us a better plane. So we worked out a deal where I would give him a loan, right? And so I gave him $170,000, you know, to purchase an airplane. And we did it on the strength of whatever, he charged me per pound to take, you know, if he's taking 300 pounds, he would take $200 times 300, and that's just his profit. And then I paid for gas in the airplane, the rent-a-cars, the hotels, the food. So all of his expenses were covered, and then he just was, you know, cash profit on the price per pound, right? So once I gave him the 170 to purchase a plane, we reduced it, or we tried to. He kept saying, oh, I still need to make money, and I'm up there. We were going to do $100 per pound, but act like it was still the 200, and he would be paying me 100 for the plane that I bought. So then I just started using the planes, and then eventually he came to me and was like, hey, I know a dude who's down, because the plane became, you know, so many states. So now I'm, you know, St. Louis, Chicago, Atlanta. Now with this bigger plane, it allowed us to now go all the way East Coast. I had people hitting me up saying, can you make it to New York? Well, prior to that, I wasn't doing New York in the big rig. It's too far. I wasn't doing New York in the Cessna airplane. It just takes too long. So now that we had this little faster, we opened up, you know, the East Coast market. And so eventually he's like, hey, I know a pilot. So we got another pilot, and then we got another pilot. And, you know, this time we let it go for a while, and I was doing my thing. And it turns out the original guy that got arrested in Detroit, as they were hitting him up to work with him, in my court papers, it eventually said that he was paid $1,100 to drive from Las Vegas to Los Angeles and go in front of my house and say that's where he lives.
Wow.
Right? And so when he originally got hit, he just talked about those guys, and he talked about the big rig, but he didn't say like the main head, you know, of the snake on the thing, so where they could cut that off. Eventually, they broke him, and he did, you know? And so then the feds, and this is what some people should take a note, like they'll let you dope deal. They'll let you commit crimes for years, bro. They'll let you go. They let me go doing the airplanes for a while. It was probably a good, at least like 18 months to almost 2 years, they'd let us rock while they were just watching us. So in the end, some of the things they did was they orchestrated a fake party for me. One of the dudes who was tied into a federal agent out of Atlanta who was in charge of the Atlanta division, they persuaded me to go to a party in Miami, Florida, and the entire party was wired up. It was like a yacht party, but it started in like the back of a house in Miami. And on that party, you know, there was federal agents there that were, you know, wearing body wires. They had the audio, and it just got really big at that point, you know.
Let me ask you a question straight up. How do you feel knowing that somebody snitched on you and you actually know the person?
Yeah, dude. You know, it is like it's I don't understand. It's kind of like when you look at somebody like a Tekashi. I don't understand how people can still like endorse that type of thing, or still like think that that's okay. Like in the end, you know what this person did? He's literally such the lowest scum of earth, is, he affected a lot of people that are good people, dude. People that sold cannabis. These people put food on the table for their wives, their kids, and they're not always like thug, criminal gangsters. Some of these people, they're average citizens, and they're doing good in their communities, and they're providing, food. So this dude went and put all of those people in jail, including myself, right? And so as I'm sitting in the federal prison, eventually I got sentenced to just under 12 years as a nonviolent first offender. I've never been arrested in my entire life.
Damn.
And the very first time I'm in handcuffs, no bail, and I'm in prison for 12 years. So, it's really extreme to see that somebody, through not willing to, do the time for their crime, that they could have such a ripple effect on others. And a lot of people, like when I talk about like Tekashi and not people like realizing that how bad snitching is, when it's really like, just accept what you did wrong and man up. Why do you have to like ruin everyone else's life, dude? Like this guy ruined so many people's lives. He broke up my marriage. He broke up my families. Everything involved, my entire, everything in my assets, my bank accounts, everything were taken from me as asset forfeiture from the government. And those are things that I even accumulated prior to what I was doing. When I had an automotive shop. I mean, I lost family photographs from a kid. I mean, so these people, it's so despicable. And it's just like, when you're sitting there and you have the time to look back while you're in prison and said, dude, this guy, I just can't even believe these people do these things, Not only on the strength that, like people talk about, snitches get stitches and this sort of thing on that level, but even through me working with, a motorcycle club, I knew going into that, I would even have these conversations with my pilot, like, dude, this is what you got to do if you get busted. I told him, I will bail you out. I will pay for your attorney. I will not leave a wounded soldier on the fucking battlefield. Mm-hmm. I have your back. Even if it means you got to go and do time, I will pay your rent. I will pay your family's bills. I'll take care of you. Maybe these people who are the scum that do that type of thing, if they don't have the means to do that, okay, you don't have the means. It doesn't still mean that you should go and be involved in that type of thing, It's just, so it's something that eventually, as like, it's hard to describe, or I don't know how to put it into words. You have to let things go. And it's kind of like not forgiveness in that aspect, but to get past like mental disabilities or mental challenges of that weighing heavy on your head while you're incarcerated or while you're in prison. So that's the type of thing that I had to just kind of like let it go and not say, oh, I'm going to send someone to, take this dude out. I'm going to do this. It's kind of like prior to me being incarcerated, if somebody ran off with my money, oftentimes I could have like an enforcer go and just talk to them. And just by physical,
you said an enforcer? Go talk to him. Isn't that an oxymoron, an enforcer talking?
Right, but just on perception, like let's say a couple of guys I knew of were like Samoans, mm-hmm. and those dudes are huge, right? So if 4 Samoans show up to talk to somebody, it's gonna be like, hey, we're just talking now. And so that's kind of like where I would go with somebody that owed me money. But at the same time, I can't really go in there and get too gnarly on them, because what happens if they're going to narc on me because these dudes just went off on them and, beat them silly. So a lot of times I would do what I could, but then I had to like let it go. And so as I was like, some of the first times I was owed large sums of money and people ran off with it, it's hard to let that go. And you could like literally be at night going, oh my God, I owe the plug, and this guy ran off with 50 grand. What am I going to do? So at that time, I had to learn. One of my friends put it to me like this: when I turn on a new client, and let's say they owe me 100 grand, I would equate that as I just started, let's say, a 7-Eleven. Okay, so now I have 7-Elevens in Detroit, I have a 7-Eleven in Chicago, Atlanta, and I might have put a few $100,000 into it, and if it didn't work, I tried, you know? And so that's how I come to terms with kind of like letting that go, because it'll eat you up forever. And so in prison, you know, people run through their race, and in the feds, I ended up running with, you know, the Mexican Southsiders, the Sureños, which are a lot of like, you know, that's essentially entirely gang members. And so when I was in their car, we call it, when you're incarcerated, oftentimes those guys would be like, yo, when I get out, I'll go get some money, we can handle this, we can go talk to these people. Some of those guys are enforcers and bill collectors. And it's like, man, it's been so long, like, I don't know. I had to just like let it go. I can't, you know what I'm saying? Like, if that makes any sense, that's the best way I learned, or I taught myself to let that stuff go.
Let me ask you something about your walk in the feds. What made you run with the Sorteños rather than with, you know, your club?
So initially I ran with the whites when I first got off the bus, right? So like one of the main places I went to was Terminal Island in San Pedro, California. I started in the Atlanta Penitentiary. We refer to it as the Castle. And then when I eventually landed in Terminal Island, I was there with the whites, and everything was fine. And then I started doing, you know, artwork through the hobby shop within the institution. And so a dude there that I was like, they have housing units, and multiple housing units. So they have them like alphabetical. You have A unit, B unit, C. So I lived in J unit, and we all have separate TV rooms per race. So I was in a particular TV room with the whites, and it was a small TV room. We only had 2 TVs, and there was maybe like 5 of us that sat in that particular room. And like, even though J unit was big, it's a 3-story complex, we were on the 3rd floor. Long story short, there was a dude that kicked it in our TV room, and he had a couple of kids, and he saw my artwork, and Christmas was coming, and he was like, hey, you know, can you make some artwork for my kids for their Christmas gifts? So I started making a bunch of paintings, and in order to, where this institution I was at, you could mail your artwork out.
Oh.
So in order to get them out for Christmas, I started popping off a bunch of artwork to this dude's family for Christmas. And in the end, he owed me, I think, for, you know, a few paintings. And at that time in prison, the value of a painting is not much, right? So he owed me like $1,200 or $1,400. But in the prison standards, $1,200 or $1,400 is a lot of money, right? So I shot him all the artwork, and he was actually there for doing like some Bernie Madoff like scam stuff. And he bragged about he had a Ferrari, he had a jet, he had the black Amex. So he, you know, he was pretty upscale from what he was doing out there on the streets. So he had this swagger about him that he had money and he had his thing, and, you know, so I didn't think much of it. I shot all those out, and then when it came time for us to square up on what he owed me, in prison sometimes when you go to commissary and you owe somebody, you say, make me a store list. So I was like, what can you do? And he's like, oh, I can get you $40. And then that was okay, you know, whatever. And then I started leaning into like slow paying me. Mm-hmm. And so then it came to this particular person that owed me, had a drug habit, you know, and he started, you know, getting drugs fronted to him on the yard through even other races. He owed the Sureño, I think almost even like 10 grand. This guy's a Wall Street dude, okay? Mm-hmm. So he doesn't walk like a gangster or a criminal. Yeah. He had like a different swag to him. So anyhow,
more of a professional.
Right.
You know, yeah.
So to kind of befriend people that he was, you know, was in our TV room, he was giving them free dope. And they didn't care because they were getting it for free, and they thought, oh, this dude, he's got money, he can do that. Well, he didn't have money. He started like, you know, created a debt on the yard, right? So it came to the point where him and I were gonna like physically fight because the other whites wouldn't do anything about it. Now in some prisons, you know, like if a white owes someone, you know, the whites as a whole, or any race for that matter, will deal with their person on whatever discipline is necessary to take care of someone that has a debt.
You got to take care of your own people.
These dudes weren't doing that because, you know, they were eating off the dope he was giving him. So they were more susceptible to be on his side of owing me money and acting like it's okay.
Right.
You know? And in the end, it's not okay. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to just like, you know, let somebody slide. But because you're in prison, you have to kind of like, you know, that's different than when I said on the street. I had to sometimes let that go. So anyways, it came down to, you know, like we're going to fight about it in the TV room, and this is all going to happen. So eventually things kind of escalated into like, you know, fighting aspect of it. And then eventually the Sureños came exclusively to me, and they were like, hey dude, the dude's trying to check in by fighting you. You know what I mean? Like he wants to do this. So now he can, when I say check in, for those of you that don't know, you go to what's called the SHU, and that's the Special Holding Unit is the acronym for it, and that's what inmates refer to as the hole. And when you go to the SHU, sometimes when you're a piece of shit and you check yourself in, it means once you're there, you're never coming back onto this terminal island. You're being shipped to some entirely new prison, and now you can go run up a debt at another prison, go and check in, and these guys do that. Anyways, the Sureños came to me and they're like, dude, he's trying to check in, bro. Don't let him do it. We'll handle this, blah, blah, blah. And it came to the point where I didn't want to be even in the TV room with this guy because he's like close quarters, you know, like I'm not feeling it. It's kind of like when you wreck your car, nothing's the same. How am I going to sit next to this dude in the TV room? So they came to me and they were like, hey, if you want, you know, when you're in this prison, you also cell up. These are, you know, prison cells. So I lived in a cell where I had iron bars on my door, and you cell. So the Sureños came to me and they said, we checked your paperwork. We had someone on the outside look you up. We know you're good. We're gonna say if you want, you can jump into one of our cells. And they told me, like, the dude that was the shot caller of that particular floor of the unit I was in, he's like, dude, my room's open right now. You can come. And so where I was in federal prison there, you can go to your case manager and say, hey, I would like to move. And you're not always tied into where they tell you your jail cell is. For instance, I would never, or anybody would have like a sex offender in their cell. So if a sex offender comes into your cell off the bus, you can't be in here. So anyway, so you're allowed to move. So I told the whites, like I told the Sureños, hey, I'll come down and meet with you guys in your TV room. Now on this particular third floor of J Unit, their TV room they had 3 TVs and might have like 12 or 15 guys that occupy this room. I said, hey, can I come down and talk to everybody later today? And they said, come down. The dude who was mainly like shot calling, we're all in there. I'm the only white. And he's like, bro, we're cool with you. If you want, you can change the channel on the TV. For those of you who don't know, in prison, probably 70-80% of all fights, some of them come from changing the channel on TV, you know? And that's where a lot of fights start. So anyways, they're like, we're cool with you. And then I started thinking, well, do I sit with you guys in the chow hall? Do I run like, you know, independent? Like, where do I do? So eventually I hit the whites up and I told them, these dudes approached me and said, you know, I can run with them. And when I went down there, and I, out of like really respect, and I felt like a love, like a family love, right out the gate when they were like, dude, when you're with us, you're with us. You know, like if anyone's got a problem, they deal with all of us, not you. Like we got this. Like if anyone has anything to do, like, you know, you don't have to worry about it. Where like other races don't always run as tight-knitted as some of the Sureños were. So I really had respect for that, and I told them, I said, man, I appreciate that. You know, you guys are really showing me a lot of love, you know? And I said, I'm going to think about it. But in my mind, I was like, man, like these dudes seem like more family-orientated and take care of, you know, like, you know, how often people talk about brotherhood. So I made the decision to, you know, link up with the leader, of that unit, and I moved over into his cell. I went into their TV room, and now everybody on the yard, now all the whites didn't really like me anymore. In the beginning, they're like, oh, that dude, he jumped over to the Serranos, which whatever. Now it's like I have all this new onset of friends through the Serranos. And so we had like softball teams, we had all this sort of thing. So I started being, like, I clown on people. Even if I don't know them that long, I'll start like joking, going hard on them, and like, people are like, and it's funny that even to just kind of touch on that, I would be in a TV room with like, let's say, 12 Serranos or whatever, and I would be like, I would make a joke on this dude, like, oh, dude, homeboy said you're the best kisser out in the yard, and just like joke on him, right? And so we would laugh because we're all at this point kind of like a family. So then instead of like him firing on me, all 12 guys would just be like, oh yeah, and they'd just come at me with like jokes, and so it was funny. And in the end, like even to this day, I have like relationships with some of those dudes, and they really, really looked out for me. And so that's kind of like the story of how I ended up in that car when I landed at Terminal Island. In state prison, that probably wouldn't have happened because they probably would have regulated homeboy for owing that money. And in the end, the dude did check in. So eventually, they call it SIS, which is like an investigative unit within the correctional officer department. They just showed up at his cell like one random day not long after I moved and said, hey, pack it up, you're going to SHU. And then he never came back on the yard.
I heard you say that this whole situation started over art. How did you get into art?
Yeah, so while I was in Terminal Island, they have I forget the word for it now. They call it I forget, where they want you to go to school. So they have places like they have a public library, they have a school, and so they have classes, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the classes, and they have these bulletin boards throughout the prison, and I saw a class and it said oil painting. And so I was like, oh, let me check it out. And so when you have a case manager in federal prison, they push you to take classes. I wish I remember the word, programming they call it. You have to program. And so every so often that you meet with them, like every 3 months for like an evaluation, and they'll say, oh, you're not programming. And it means you have to sign up for like Business 101, or you have to get your high school diploma. And so he's telling me you're not programming. So part of programming, I noticed one day, there's a painting class. So I go and I sign up for the painting class, and it's in a really large room, and they have all these easels, and the prison had purchased, canvas, paint, and brushes, and then an inmate was the actual instructor of the art class. And it met like 2 days a week or something, like, on a Thursday at 3 o'clock, it's an hour class, and we all paint the same, the instructor, okay, today you guys are all gonna paint this landscape, and all 20 people would paint the same thing. Now, once I did that, I was like, oh, this is pretty cool. As a kid, I was like a graffiti writer, not so much in the sense of like doing a lot of spray painting all over the city. I had a little, but oftentimes just in school, doing big old, things on paper, and, making stuff for friends and painting a little bit. So once I found out through the oil painting class, you can put your name on a waiting list. And the waiting list is for, they call it a hobby locker. And so you're allowed to do different departments. You can't do all of them, but you can pick between painting, ceramics, or leather crafting, right? So I put my name on a waiting list for, a hobby locker for the art. And I didn't know much in the way of painting. I painted a little bit in high school, and it was more just like for fun. It was never as like, trying to, really do much. And so,
was it good, or was it just, you just weren't that interested in
high school?
Yeah.
I think it was good in the sense that like all of my high school friends, and then my mom's friends, when they'd come over to the house before the paintings were even done, people were like, I want to buy that. I want to buy that. So I was like selling, paintings to my friends and my mom's friends and stuff like that, but not a lot, maybe like, a dozen. And I didn't know how to be an artist. I didn't know anything about it. So a lot of times I would just be like, yeah, give me what, the cost of it. Give me $200, like I wasn't saying it to like make a profession out of it, right? So as I eventually got approved for my hobby locker, they give you a paper catalog, and it's like this thick, and it's through a company called Blick, and you're able to order once a month, and you could always do like $300. But at the same time, they have commissary, and commissary is groceries. You only could spend $300 on commissary and your like hobby stuff combined. I couldn't do $600 on hobby, and I'm sorry, $300 on hobby and $300 on groceries. So I had to like say, oh, do I want to buy 100 in groceries and then 200 in art supplies? And so eventually I started buying, paint, canvas, and brushes. And like any artist, I struggled with the learning process of like not knowing and being a beginner. And it just was such a positive way for me to pass time being incarcerated. I didn't give up as a painter. And when I say that because other dudes would come in and get a hobby locker, and literally a locker's like this tall, and then you have a countertop, and that's your workstation. So your workstation's like this big. So a dude's like right here next to me, right? And so people would come in and they would just get a locker and they would start to paint. And then they would, like your locker, you can come in every day. You have a padlock, you got your own, combination. And you could come in and you could paint 7 days a week. But these dudes would come in and try it like 2 or 3 times. Oh man, like it's hard, I can't do it. And they would give up, and then they would stop showing up. And then the next thing you know, they just, the guards will take your locker if you're not purchasing art supplies. So if you go like 60 days or 90 days without buying anything, then they'll say, hey, you're done. They'll give you an opportunity. You got to buy something, or you're out. So all these dudes would give up. And becoming an artist there's a lot of learning curve. And I wasn't reading books on how to do art. I was merely learning through the process of hands-on experience. And there was a dude that had the locker directly next to me who he was a young guy, and he got a 20-year sentence because he was selling ecstasy, and somebody died that he sold ecstasy to. And he had got a 20-year sentence, and he was only like 20 years old or something. He was a youngster. And he had already been to art school. So when he came there, he would always critic me in like a hater way. Like, oh, you're not doing that right. You're mixing a cold color with a warm color. Or, the arm isn't anatomically correct. That wouldn't look right. And so other dudes that I hung out with are like, fuck, this dude's such a hater. But in a way, it kind of, he did help. I can appreciate in some cases like constructive criticism. But in the end, so what I did, there's a book called The Outliers, and The Outliers talks about when you're a professional at something, anything, let's say it's Bill Gates, he's not any smarter than any one person. Well, technically maybe he is by smarter, right? But he put in the work. So he put himself on the computer as a kid and didn't take himself off. And what they're saying is if you put 30,000 hours into something, you eventually become a professional at your craft, right? And so I think through me not giving up, and I literally painted 6 years, 7 days a week. So dude, like, you know what I mean? I put in that work, and when my family and friends would send me pictures into the prison, you could mail in photographs of artists on Instagram and artists that were like similar and doing what I'm doing, and I could start to see, they were obviously better than I was because I was like an intermediate or a beginner. And over time, I started seeing like I'm creeping on these guys, and now I feel like, I've put in 7, 8 years as like behind the brush. Right. And so now, prior to when I left federal prison, I was already like in my head gearing up to become an artist, like a pop artist. All I was really doing is just stacking what I call it, right? Just stacking artwork. And because the government seized all of my assets, and people say, did you have money buried? I didn't have money buried, you know? And so I came out of prison with nothing. And I didn't have like a wealthy family to say, oh, here's your car, here's your house, here's your this. So it's kind of like, I knew before I left, I need to do something, you know? Like inmates leave saying, I got to get a job, I got to start a business. So my thing was, I'm going to use these paintings as like a form of a savings account. Granted, I might not sell one, you know, in this particular week, but hey, maybe I can off 1 or 2 a month, and if they're a G, 1,000, 2,000, 3,000, I can start to kind of eat and learn. So I did this on the premise of like knowing, hey, when I get out of prison, I'm going to try to be an artist. If anything, I at least can sell artwork to friends and family and have some money saved, right? So I hit the streets, and I was in a halfway house, and at this particular halfway house, you're allowed to have a smartphone, and my family had made like an Instagram account for me exclusively just for my art, to kind of like show my friends and family while I was incarcerated, look at what he's doing, you know, a platform to people to say. So while I was incarcerated, you can also take pictures. Like every Saturday, they have a photo guy that works on the yard, and he could come and take pictures of my latest artwork. So I would send those home to like my mom and have her say, oh, post that on Instagram so my people know I just made this. So anyhow, I started doing that, and I was sitting in a halfway house in the city of Watts, and like not even out very long, you know? Literally.
Was it on Central?
I can't even remember the street by now. I think it probably was. It was called something the same as like, it was Monopoly. What was the name of the house? Dude, I had to cut the checks. They would take half my money. And it was like, dude, what was the name of the place? It was something that was like,
you had to go around.
It was
the
one of the names.
Yeah.
It was one of the names of a property. It was kind of funny actually that was the case.
Like Boardwalk or something like that.
What was the name of the place, dude? Anyhow, so I'm sitting there, and I got a text message from an art gallery, and I always equated like at that moment through teaching myself art galleries. Oh, it's going to be a lot of money. She's like, how much is this one? So I hit him with the price, and he's like, that's too much. My customers are this type of clientele, and it was actually in a shopping mall. Mm-hmm. And so I kind of just was like, okay then, and left that be. And so at the halfway house, you're limited to your movement. Mm-hmm. So I spent a lot of time in the halfway house. So I decided to like look this person up in their gallery, and I took it upon myself, instead of like instant messaging, is I grabbed the phone number and I just called the dude. And I was like, hey, you messaged me. And he was like, oh yeah, and I introduced myself, and I said, hey, because on my Instagram, it didn't say anything about being incarcerated. So as I called him, and I was like, hey, this is who I am, and this is what my paintings are from prison. And he was like, wow, amazing. Like he was like, this is.
Now they're worth a whole lot more.
Yeah, well, that, and he was just like taken back by the story. And he's like, can you come in? And for those of you who don't know, in the halfway house, every single movement is approved in advance. You have to put in for it's called a pass, and you fill it out every week. Like, hey, this Saturday I would like to go to the mall to buy clothes, and I'll be at this mall between 1 and 3. And then when you get there, you have to call the halfway house and say, I'm here, So anyways, I go and meet with this particular owner of the gallery, and it just so happens it's like a week before the Thanksgiving, the Black Friday, one of like the biggest shopping days in the year, especially for people in a mall. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, okay, I understand your price point is more affordable for, this particular mall. And so he's like, yeah, bring some stuff in. I went and I loaded this particular art gallery up with over 50 original pieces before Black Friday on Thanksgiving. So I got a pass. The owner of the gallery is like, would you like to come in and paint live, and I'll let my customers know you're painting. There'll be a lot of people in the mall. And so I got a pass to go and paint on like the Saturday after, Black Friday. And I remember it was so weird. He sent me a message. He was like, how far away are you? How long before you get here? And when I got there, he had like balloons set up, and he kind of had it like kind of an event, like,
right,
we'll have a live person painting. And so I set up, and before I got there, right when I walked in, people had purchased artwork either because I could only get there at like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And so people had purchased artwork the day before and that day. And nobody knew who I was. At that point, I didn't have like a following where people are going to go to a certain location because they knew that my stuff was there at that moment. So they just happenstance to like come into a gallery and purchase art. But when I got there, he's like, hey, this guy bought your art, that guy bought your art, that guy bought your art, and those guys want signatures and pictures with you. And I was like, what? You know what I mean? And so next thing you know, he's handing me a Sharpie and artwork, and he's like, yeah, they want you to. And so I'm giving like autographing the back, I'm taking pictures. Like one dude's like, the piece I had brought to paint that day was just a raw canvas with sketch. And it was sketched with a Rolls Royce and the Monopoly guy taking a selfie in front of the Rolls Royce with Hollywood. And one of the guys that had purchased a piece of art was like, oh man, I have that same Rolls Royce. I want that one when it's done. And so I was like, wow, like things are, happening. And he's like, you went to prison for cannabis? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I'm legal. I do the same thing. And so I was just like, kind of like a shock factor that, wow, I'm signing like an autograph and people are buying my artwork. And dude, I'm out of prison like a month and a half. I can hardly even move around. I don't really have much freedom, And so it was actually that gallery that put me on and, gave me that shot that I think perpetuated me to where I could make a run as an artist. If I didn't have that gallery, I would probably be working for my friend's construction company to like pay bills at that moment. Even through the halfway house to get, a pass to move around every day, my friend put me on at his construction company, as an employee. And so, it was like a total, I think it was all God that did that. He put that in my hand. And I sometimes, if you go all the way back to before when I was like in high school and I made paintings, maybe God provided me with this gift and I took it and I went the wrong direction and I went and became, a drug dealer. And now it's like, these things that, I gave me a gift of being, an artist, and now I'm giving this opportunity to actually, be professional, and I can actually pay my bills and be an artist. And so it's just, that's what kind of led, and it worked. So when I was like in prison saying, this is what I'm going to do, and the dude next to me that had the 20-year sentence and he went to art school, he hated my artwork. And one time he told me, and it really pissed me off, he was like, I can't even believe that anyone would ever hang your artwork on the walls. He's like, if people hang it up, they're just trying to be nice and tell you, like, be polite and say they hang it up. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I have friends that already have my artwork. Like a Wall Street trader's like texted or, told my family, oh, I have this cool piece he did in my office. And he sent pictures of it. He's like, well, I put it up. I love it. So even while I was in prison, people still had my art. But yet this dude was like, you'll never make it, And so here I was, and I wouldn't say that I've made it and I'm making it on the level that I once was, but hey, I'm able to become an actual artist and earn a living, and that could be my career,
Are you still interested in the cannabis side?
Well, I'm on federal probation, so through probation, I'm not allowed to participate in the cannabis industry. Some states, like California, is starting to change that, where now if you have a felony for cannabis, a state charge or perhaps even a federal charge, you're allowed the opportunity. Where, some cases, even through me being on probation, I'm not allowed that opportunity. And in a way, it seems like an injustice. I can remember when weed became legal and I was in prison, and a guard would be, they do strip searches when you're leaving the visiting room, and so they're interacting, they're like, oh, let's go strip you out, and they're like, oh, weed's legal now, huh? You're still here, and and it's just like lame, dude. Like
cool.
These dudes like are laughing at me, saying you're in prison and weed's everywhere.
Right.
Like the correctional officer that was in charge of the hobby shop, he would sometimes come in and we'd have to interact with him, and I don't try to interact with police.
Right.
And he would come in and he'd say, oh, everyone smokes out there, because we don't know what's going on in the street.
Yeah.
He's like, dude, the kids on my street corner are out there smoking, and they have these, the brands, like packaging like candy for kids. And I was like, oh, really? Oh, this. And I didn't know. Obviously, I hear a little bit, but I don't know how it's going on. And then when I came out and I saw the price of a pound, and I was like, wow, how are people making money? Like the market price of a pound in California is so far down, there's like no money left on the table unless you're an actual like grower or an owner of a dispensary. You have your gray market areas, but there is a lot that's changed from the time that I did it to the current market of today and the legal or even the gray market,
So
by the market tanking so much, price per pound.
Right.
Like,
but that's what I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
So how you feel about when they force droughts?
I'm sorry, what was it?
When they force droughts, when up north or Oregon or whoever, when they force those droughts to make the prices sky high.
It's just still like weird, and I sometimes wish and hope that like the market will go up on the price of a pound.
You talking about all the way back to like when it was 5,200 and all that?
Maybe not 5,200, but at least like 3,000. I know we talked. Some of the markets are like that, but not indefinitely. And the reason why I say I would like to see it go up is because even if you're going to be a gray market and illegal grow operator, and you're going to start a grow, it's almost like you're putting up so much money, and you're doing an illegal grow in a warehouse, and you're spending $100,000 setting up your organization and setting up your lights and your grows and your plants. At the end of the day, if you're a wholesaler and let's say you're selling your pound for $2,000, even less, like even as like a person, let's say you're growing apples or oranges or whatever the case is, it's almost like you're spending so much and you're making very little. And I just feel like if you're spending so much and you're putting in the time and you're illegal, dude, there should be a better profit margin for you or for everyone. So now as a wholesaler, the market price is so competitive. Like everybody has cannabis, right? So it's not as like,
it's not a unicorn anymore.
Exclusive as it used to be. Like, oh, there's not as many plugs. A lot of people have it. And so now a person who's just a middleman, they're only making in some cases like $50 on a pound, $100 on a pound. And if you live here in California, unless you're moving, large amounts, if you're going to move 10 pounds to somebody and you're going to make $50 on a pound, at the end of the day, by the time you're living in California and you have your, expenses of your home, your car, your family, you're not making much money. And, I would like to see people make more money if they're going to operate in the illegal end of it, and if they're going to operate in the legal end too. It shouldn't be, that just the main guys, like, obviously in the real world today, the bosses make the money, the corporate, the Amazons and those sort of people. Now they have it to where now the corporate people are the leaders of making money within the dispensary and the growers and stuff like that, and not really leaving enough skin on the bone for everyone else.
Right.
So I feel like if the market price went up, we would have more opportunity within everyone who's trying to make money.
Interesting theory.
Yeah.
I ain't gonna let you get out of here before I ask you a couple of music questions. I heard you slide in that you DJ.
Huh, yeah.
That you DJ. So what got you into DJing? Like, was it like what was your brand, your genre of music that you got with?
Totally. So it's interesting when I started DJing before I even had a driver's license, right? And so like when I mentioned earlier, I hung around older kids, and it's sometimes because like, an older kids or an older brother and stuff like that, right? So there was one of my friends who I hung out with, he had an older friend, and they had turntables set up at a house, like not inside of our friend's house, but kind of like almost in like a shed. And so we would all go over there, and I was literally probably like 14 or 15 years old, and I would go into this little shed, and there would be like 3 or 4 of us in there, and it was this friend's house, and he had the mixer and the Technique 1200s and the crates of records. So my parents were divorced. I lived with my mom, and I start going home and telling my mom, like, I want turntables, I want a mixer, and my mom was like, you can't have one, And so I used to tell my mom, like, she would get child support from my dad, and my mom, I was hard on her in the sense when I would tell her that money belongs to belongs to me.
Right.
And so one time she was like, well, we use that for you to eat. I use that to pay your rent. And I was like, no, that's my money. So she was like, you want it? And it was like something like $300 a month or something on child support. So she started to give it to me. And then she was like, then I'm not buying you anything. I'm not buying you your shoes. I'm not buying you, this stuff. So I was like, I'm going to save up and get one turntable, right? And so I eventually got one turntable, and I worked my way up, and I got 2 turntables and a mixer at my own house. And I remember, like, that was the time, it's so funny, dude. That was the time when NWA hadn't come out yet, but Eazy-E was out. With a single on vinyl was Boys in the Hood, right? And so I bought that record, and I used to have 2 copies, so I could spin, scratch over here and loop back and forth. And so
wait a minute, wait. You know how to scratch? You know how to mix and all of that?
Totally. At 14.
All right.
Yeah.
You still know how to do it?
Yeah, totally.
All right, we're gonna find out. Since you said
absolutely.
That,
I love it. So I was actually better at scratching than beat mixing.
All right.
Because I would love to just scratch for hours, like, and I would even make my friends mixtapes, actual cassette tapes. I'm showing my age right now, right? I would make high school people or grade school people mixtapes, and even when Boys in the Hood on the break, it had like scratches, and I'd be like, oh, that's me, but it wasn't, what I mean? But they didn't know. A lot of people didn't hear some of that music. And so the radio station here in LA that I just like loved back then was K-Day, and it was on AM, and it was like 1580 K-Day. And so that was like my thing, and here I was in an upscale neighborhood DJing and listening to like rap music. And if we can quickly touch on something that even in prison a lot of people were like, dude, you're lying. And so I would buy vinyl records at this place in Gardena called the Rhodium Swap Meet.
Yes,
right?
sir.
And so the Rhodium Swap Meet, there was the owner of the booth was an Asian guy named Steve. And at that particular time, Dr. Dre was in a group called the Wrecking Crew. And the Wrecking Crew, through Dr. Dre, would make mixtapes. And I remember he would title them like 85 Alive. And look, that's the year, 85, right? And so I would also buy the cassette tapes, and the cassette tape would be like 90 minutes of just constant, full Dr. Dre on an 8-track or whatever. And so I was there at that record booth buying records, and like Eazy-E had come out. I don't think NWA definitely hadn't come out with Straight Outta Compton, but they might have had a single of Dope Man. And you had all the people on the cover. There was probably like 20 people. 20 people on that album cover.
I mean NWA and the Posse.
NWA, yeah. And so I was in a booth, and my mom would drop me off with my friends, say, well, I'll pick you up in an hour. I couldn't even drive, and I'm there with my little money buying, a little stack of records. I can't afford much as a 15-year-old kid. And a dude was there, and he was in kind of like a high school Letterman jacket. And he had the black leather sleeves, and then right here it said his name, and his name was DJ Speed. And so on the back it had the NWA red logo, and it said Straight Outta Compton, and he had like a bunch of records. So on the back wall of the booth you would point to like, oh, what's that? He had it all laid out. And so DJ Speed had a bunch of records, And as a 15-year-old, I'm talking to him, oh yeah, that's cool, you're doing this. And back then, we had pagers.
Yeah.
And like, we didn't even have the Motorola brick, I don't think, really just yet. It was more of like the Sky pagers. And you know, as creepy as nowadays it is for an adult to give his phone number to a minor, he gave me his phone number. And so I'm over there back in the little hood in Manhattan Beach, and I'm like, yo, NWA gave me his number, let's call him. And I page him, and he's like, who's this? And I was like, hey, it's me. And they were like, he's like, oh, we're over here at the, DJing, wherever. Yeah. If you guys want, come through. Yeah. So one of my older friends, he had like, I remember he recently passed away, and we had a lowered Bug, Volkswagen Bug. And we rolled out to Compton, and I don't remember whose house it exactly was, but it was the same concept. It had like a back day room off the back of the property, and they had turntables and a mixer. And as soon as we get there, like Dre was there, and he would always wear the same jumpsuit. He always had this dark blue and light navy blue, and instantly he was there. MC Ren was there, and dude, everybody was cool to us. You would think like, who are these white dudes rolling up in here, and why are they young? And the other kid, he was older than me, but we were minors, and we were hanging out. And so it became cool where DJ Speed was like, whatever, we just go vibe out, make music, and hang out. And
you used to go to DJ Speed's house on a regular basis?
Kind of, yeah. Yeah, eventually their album dropped, and they started becoming huge. Word. And they were just gone at that point, on tour and everywhere. Yeah. So I would page homeboy, and at that time he had what's called a Sky pager. And most pagers worked locally. And if you got outside your zone, you couldn't get a page. But he had a Sky pager, and I'd page him, and be like, what are you guys doing? Oh, we're in Arizona, we're on tour, blah, blah, blah. And then it would say like they're doing something like not far out of the LA area, and they would invite me to a show. And so here I am. I remember one time going to like an Eazy-E. It was mainly Eazy-E was on the forefront first, and then NWA started coming in, and it was like they were just both starting, and it was not a big venue of where they performed that night. And it had a backstage area, and on the back parking lot there was a door that had like one of those metal screen, like iron metal, but a screen door. And so that part of it was open, and there was people that they couldn't get in, but they were at that door, and they were like, oh, easy, yeah, easy, And so my buddy and I, it was like just me and my other like white dude, and I hate to even say like race, like we're the only white dudes, right? We rolled up to the door and we opened it, and these girls like, oh, and they're handing us paper to go and get like autographs of like Easy and all these people. And so like at the time, I don't even know where they were. We walked around the corner and like started signing them ourselves as if we were Easy for them, and walked back out, and we're like, yo, and they started freaking out. And then even as like all of us left at the end of the show together, people were in the parking lot like, who are you? Are you DJ Yella? Like, cause we're the white guy, And so people would trip, and even to this day, like one of my buddies was like, dude, I remember like DJ Speed would even come and pick me up sometimes from high school. Like before I had a car, he would come over and we'd go use my turntables and hang out, and and so he would we were just hang out, and even one of my friends was like, dude, it's crazy, you hung out with like NWA as like a minor, like before they even came out. And it's like, it's cool. All of them were really cool, other than like Ice Cube. Not to say that he wasn't like hospitable to us. He just kind of had that mean mugging, the eyebrows that he has, like he didn't introduce himself to us. Right. He wouldn't really talk to me like that, Right. But like Ren or somebody would talk to me. And it's funny that so much that we hung out, I ended up being, they called me when they were doing Eazy-E's video up on like La Cienega in a studio, and it was called We Want Easy, and they needed people in the audience, like, oh, come out. And so I remember we're in the audience, like, We Want Easy, and to my friends, I was like a huge thing, like, yo, I'm hanging out with, NWA, I'm in the video, even though I'm just a dumbass extra, And so then at one point too, DJ Speed's like, hey, we're doing the photo shoot for Eazy's album. Eazy does it. Yeah. And so they actually had done it under a freeway underpass, and they had a projector, and on the projector it had like a skull and crossbones, and Eazy-E had an Astro van on, like back then there was like inky saw blades all lowered out, and that was when you had the phone that it was attached to the car, physically bolted in. So my friend and I were invited over to that photo shoot. So I went, and you had like Ren and Dre and I think Yell on Everybody, even though it was an Eazy's album. I remember one of them was holding the red bat, and I jumped in the car, and I'm in the like driver's thing of the car, and I was holding the phone up, like thinking my dumb ass is gonna be in the picture on Eazy's album, you know what I mean? But and at the end of the day, like I don't know if it was a picture before we were there, or as it got dark in the middle of the night, like you couldn't see me in there.
Right.
But I recorded a song actually at Eazy-E's house with DJ Speed as the producer of the beat. And I recorded a song called Cop Killer. And so Eazy didn't know, because Eazy wasn't there. Eazy had a lot of houses.
Right.
And so this was a house where it had audio studio equipment in it, and DJ Speed was allowed to be a producer. Like he produced some tracks even for like the DOC and stuff like that. And so I paid him a couple $100, and he made a track for me, and we recorded Cop Killer. And I recorded in the beginning, you had he had like an Above the Law sample, and he had some sirens, and we had like a skit where it was the same thing, like cop rolled up, hey, license registration, and instead of handing over the license registration, you hear like gunshots and a car take off, and then I start rapping, and I think the beginning of it was, I can't help but laugh when a cop's lying just dying in his own bloodbath. And then I go on to just talk about like killing cops, and here I am like a 16-year-old in an affluent upscale white neighborhood, and my parents are like, you know, you're not going to be a rapper. When are you going to get your life together? You know, like when I, you know, like 18, and I'm like, you guys don't understand. I'm going to be huge. In my head, I was going to be on the news. I was going to be this. And then all of a sudden, Ice-T comes out with Body Count, and it's just controversy everywhere. He even gets dropped from, you know, yeah. So that was my thing, you know. I've kind of always been, even when I was rapping and I was making those types of songs, I made another song called The Rolex Bandit. And what I did is I talked about, you know, finding someone who had an ad in the paper, going and stealing their Rolex, and then going into the jewelry store and stealing a Rolex. I had these different verses of how like the Rolex Bandit just came off all the, you know, your Rolex, like you just came off it to me or whatever. And so I had other friends of mine that rap, and they were trying to like a De La Soul or a Tribe Called Quest, and they were like, yo, dude, you can't kill cops. You're a white dude from the neighborhood. And I was like, no, I'm killing cops. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like, you know, like part of my thing. You know, I've always kind of been like a black market, you know, underground street type of person.
What was your rhyme name?
Huh?
What was your rhyme name?
Sinister.
That's right.
Yeah.
You ever reach out to any NWA once you got older, once you started doing your thing?
It's funny that I think I hit, I did hit DJ Speed on Instagram, and I never heard back from him. Like, I don't know if he just thought it was a weird message or what, but I haven't been able to like literally get him on the phone type of thing. But some of them might even been scared, like, because I went away for so long, and when I come back on the scene and I'm sending them links to like a YouTube of me talking about prison, and they're like, what's this? And, you know, so yeah, we just kind of, as people grow apart, you know, through, as you know, when you get older, it just kind of, you know, we grew apart, and I just lost contact. And then especially once I became like a massive cannabis dealer, like, the whole DJing and whatnot, just kind of, you know, what's crazy is I was kind of like such a clucker, dude. I got my own lowered truck when I was a kid, and I was kind of over DJing at that point, you know, and I sold my turntables so I could buy centerline wheels for my lowered truck. You know what I mean? Because back then you don't make what DJs make now, and I was like, man, I wish I was a DJ today, you know, like these dudes make millions, where I'm doing a house party and I'm lucky to get $300. Right. You know?
Well, hey, I really want to say this was a very interesting.
I appreciate it too, man. You guys.
So, what we want? Is there any knowledge that you want to shoot out before we go?
You know, like, where do I start, right? You know, I just think that for those of you who are operating in the gray market, you know, you guys really should be doing, you know, prepaid phones, throwing phones away, watching your surroundings. You know, these cops are 100 yards away with pictures and photographs, and a lot of people get comfortable and they talk on the phone, and they may or may not know, but within the United States government, there's a law called conspiracy. and no other government has this law, right? So conspiracy, you and I can have a conversation at McDonald's about you wanting to set up a grow and maybe me showing you how to do it, okay? Now, I say no thank you, and you go on to be a grower, and you grow and you get busted. Well, now because you told me about it, and I didn't go and report you, and I met person with you, I'm in on a conspiracy of your crime. And so I was incarcerated with dudes that are like, yo, I was on 3 phone calls. And dudes were like, yeah, I didn't even say anything on my phone call. So a lot of these dudes get really loose with what they're doing, you know? And I just say, like, if you're gonna be that person, you know, buy a phone, and you, not everything's profit. You have to have some business expense, you know? Like, throw your phones away, you know, be legit on what you're doing and what you're saying. And, you know, and then for people that are not in that business, I would just like to say, like, maybe for kids that, you know, are growing up, you know, and we want to lead them away from being like dope dealers, all I would have to say is I truly believe in the words now. I never did, when it says you can be anything you want to be. And after reading the book like Outliers, and I read Russell Simmons' book, he talks about you really can be. And all it comes down to be, when you say I want to be anything you want to be, is putting in the work. If your kid who's 8 years old and says, Dad, I want to be a lawyer, he can absolutely be a lawyer if you start him every day and he's working at it and working at it. Eventually, throughout giving up, you're going to be a lawyer. You know, I even have a girl that I dated in high school, and she became a lawyer, and as we dated, she was like, oh, I'm going to be a lawyer. And in my head, I was like, no, you're not. Like, you know, you're not going to do it. And then, sure enough, in federal prison, my mom hits me up, and she's like, oh, somebody messaged your Instagram, your ex, and she wanted to talk to you or whatever. And I was like, oh, what's this? And she's like, oh, I'm a lawyer now. And so I just feel like, you know, not everybody has to be led, even through our environment, to being, you know, like criminals. You know, it's just a matter of, like I said, putting in the work. You know, like if a kid wants to be a professional athlete, dude, you've got to put in the work. You got to eat, live, breathe your profession. You know, people like a Mayweather or a Kobe, those people, they didn't do it because they just randomly every now and then did that, you know, and they achieved it because they didn't stop. So I would say for kids that want to be anything they want to be, they can be it. You know, they can do that. I mean, maybe their neighborhood allows them not those opportunities in some cases, because maybe the finances aren't there to have them, you know, play basketball. But it doesn't mean you can't find a way that's, you know, more affordable, or something that somebody can still hone their craft or their profession or seek their dreams, you know?
And that's what's to get down.
I'm on that brainwash, full rollout, anonymous. Underplay the overplay, strategic, I promise. More dope brings more Negroes. Watch them heroes, pro lethal. Dream killers feast on people. Nubians in need, mine on the hunt. Paul Bear, sharp fluid gates and piston bumps. No excuses, that's a sin. Back to the begin. Muscle memory, pseudo respect and revenge. Plays blindfolded, a bucket list with interest. Forgiveness, the shadows and mirrors who handle business. Legacy, all grind, no guest list. Land in jurisdiction, make your bread prejudice. For the purists and the tourists, Q sticky for ghetto jurors. Swing high, swing low, you forgot that we do this. Bank selection, smooth DR vibe. Underground icon, you have now been gentrified.